Our delay was a wonderful opportunity for you to practice presence. And I'm told that everybody was coming in very slowly. People were gradually coming into the room, and nobody got upset, apparently, unless I'm misinformed. And it's wonderful to see so many awakened or awakening human beings, because you're all here, almost all, because what I call the awakening process, which is a shift in consciousness, is taking place in you. And if it's not yet, and you have come here either by accident, or you couldn't say no to somebody who said you should come, then either you are in for a wonderful surprise, or this evening will be excruciatingly boring for you. And if the latter is the case, feel free to get up. You will not be judged, because most people here are very conscious. They don't judge anymore. You will not be judged whatsoever, so feel free to leave. And if you need to go to the bathroom, don't believe that people will now think that you are completely unconscious and you're not coming back. I think we're on Broadway here, aren't we? This is Broadway. A few days ago, I happened to see a clip on YouTube, a very old film clip, which said Broadway, Times Square and Broadway, it was mostly Broadway, in 1929. And it showed like 10 minutes of people and cars hurrying along Broadway. Everybody in a hurry, trying to get somewhere. That was 1929. I wonder where they got to. And you could do the same now. You could sit or stand somewhere on Broadway and just for a few minutes observe all the people and cars walking past you, and realizing in 80 years' time, well, at the most 90, they'll all be gone. And everybody in 1929 and everybody now walking along Broadway or any other street in any other city of the world, everybody carries a certain burden, which is the burden of their life, or as I call it, their life situation. And there's nobody who does not, to a greater or lesser degree, carry this burden with himself, with herself. And this is what the Buddha called the self. That is the burden of the self. And many people, and you may find periodically you may still get drawn into this too, although you are awakening, you are coming out of it. Many people's entire life or entire consciousness is completely absorbed by their problems, by their life situation. That is what fills their mind during the waking hours. And even while they're dreaming at night, still it gets reflected even in dreams. So you walk around, and many people's sense of self, sense of identity, which is of course a fundamental thing, but your identity is, you will be talking about that quite a bit probably this evening. I say probably because I don't know what I'm going to talk about. You carry the burden of this problematic identity with yourself. And so many people define their self, their identity, in terms of their problems. And so this is what you take to the therapist. When you go to the therapist, you're taking with you your problematic self, an identity that is confined, that is defined in terms of problems. You take that self to the therapist's office, and then you say to the therapist, this is the riddle I'm presenting to you. Now solve this riddle of me. Give me the key to this solution of me. Please show me how to get rid of my problems. Or if you already have some insight into yourself, you will say to the therapist, show me how to not make a problem out of my life. How not to show me how not to convert every challenge that arises in my life into a problem and then incorporate it into my sense of self, so that the problem identity becomes you. It's a very common thing. People don't know that this is what's happening, so they truly carry the burden of the self, the problematic self. And what problems do they have? Some are very real challenges. They could be to do with your physical health, your body. Could be to do with your financial situation or your living situation, your relationships, a huge source of problems you might have noticed. Your relationship, intimate relationship, even more problematic. So you have all that, so that you have somebody, a family member going through suffering. We've already mentioned finances, work, professional, living situation, health situation. That's more or less it. Relationships. So these are humans. Every human gets challenged in one or several of these areas in different periods of their life. You cannot go through life without being challenged deeply by life. Life will present you with challenges. You can't escape that. And even if you awaken spiritually, it does not mean that you will no longer experience life as challenging. The difference is you will no longer transform the challenges of life into suffering. You will no longer transform the challenges of life into a problematic me. And so that is the shift. Now that I've talked about these challenges that nobody escapes, now I forgot to mention perhaps the most important source of suffering actually does not come to you from the external situation of your life and not even from your physical body. For the majority of people, the greatest source of suffering is produced by their own mind. But they don't know that. Once you realize that the greater part of your suffering is unconsciously produced by thought processes in your head that create certain emotions that are experienced as painful, not pleasant, any form of unhappiness, you would see that ultimately the mind is perhaps the greatest source of suffering in your life. But not just the mind, there's something that we could call the unobserved mind is the source of suffering. What does that mean? The unobserved mind means that thoughts come into your head, they interpret what's around you, they interpret your past, they project into the future continuously, they judge this and that according to the particular conditioning of your thought processes, of your mind, and you don't realize that these are all narratives, these are all stories that you tell yourself about yourself and about other people and about your past, about your so-called future, and the unobserved mind means you believe immediately in the interpretations that arise in your mind about life, about yourself, about others, about situations you find yourself in. This is how it is. That's it. My life has been just so dreadful. I would have imagined it. When I was 19, I imagined something very different from what it has come. It wasn't meant to turn out like this. It's all turned into a terrible tragedy and has come to nothing. My whole life is completely pointless. It's just one example of a narrative. There are many other more complicated narratives, but just as problematic and create an enormous amount of suffering. The unobserved mind means you believe in every thought that comes into your head, virtually. In other words, when I say you believe in every thought that comes into your head, it means you are in the grip of that stream of thinking that interprets people, places, situations, your so-called life for you. And you don't know it. So you inhabit ultimately this mind that interprets things, and you actually, every person you meet, every situation you go into, your entire past and your so-called future is interpreted through the veil of this narrative. And the unobserved mind means you do not know that this is what's happening. You mistake reality for the thought processes in your head. What's missing is what we could call awareness. Awareness of thoughts arising in your head. A thought, for example, that says, let's say, my life has been I have failed at most things in my life. Simple. It's come to nothing. And perhaps you had wonderful successes and then they came to an end and now you have failed completely. My life is completely become... What's the point of it all? What is the point of it all? Why continue? I can't carry on like this anymore. And the future, then you have all kinds of narratives of how the future is going to unfold for you. And the future, there's two aspects to it. Hope, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. One day I'm going to make it. That's an interesting expression. Make it. Make what? I'm going to make it. And perhaps you will make it, whatever it meant to you, perhaps you will make it, and it is something to celebrate. Suddenly you get the recognition you wanted. Suddenly you get the material possessions you wanted. Suddenly you get the ideal partner, well, at least seemingly ideal in the early stages of the relationship, but that's you find the ideal partner, and then I made it. So there are many ways of making it according to your personal desires, and very quickly, after a little while, you realize that even making it doesn't free you from suffering and from further problem making. So there's no doubt that life is extremely challenging for not only for every human being, for every life form, for every animal, even for every plant. Life is precarious, it is fleeting for every life form, and yes, it's very challenging. An animal is born, a little puppy, what's going to happen to it? It's very fragile. A human life is very fragile. And continuously you're beset with so-called problems. And then the point comes where you can't, suddenly you have a thought in your head, he says, I can't take anymore. And if you completely believe in the thought, I can't take any more of this, you may draw the conclusion that it's better to jump off a bridge somewhere or a building. If you're in New York, buildings might work best. You jump off if you completely believe in the thought that this is just too much, I can't take just one thing after another. Why is God or life doing this to me? God must be malicious, evil, just out to get me. Everybody else is fine. I know it because I read the Facebook pages of all these. And I know they're all fine, they're doing great. They're having wonderful meals because their photos are there. And they're all continuously in a state of ecstatic happiness, indicated by the two fingers they have when they show, when photos are... No, sorry. My life is great. It's so great. So you construct then an avatar, so to speak, in your head, and this is the Facebook avatar. And some people actually confuse that with who they are, and that becomes very problematic after a while. So I can't take anymore. This is it. You might as well end. Some people you might have noticed in yourself. You talk to yourself as if you were talking to somebody else. I can't take. Why don't you just kill yourself? So you have a dialogue with yourself, and then you get completely involved in this dialogue, and there is no awareness in the background that tells you that these are certain thoughts arising in your mind. This is a narrative that's arising in your mind, according to the conditioning of your mind that goes back to when you were born. And if you don't know this, you believe in it, you're in the grip of the narrative that produces emotions. By the way, I'm sure you've noticed, the body that produces emotions arise in the body. The body cannot tell the difference between something that's happening to you and something that your mind is saying. If your mind is saying that your life is totally dreadful, then your body takes that as a real thing. The body doesn't know the difference between, if your mind says you're in hell, The body cannot tell the difference whether you're actually in hell or whether you're just telling yourself that you're in hell. So the unobserved mind is something that we call, well, the term we have for this kind of existence is unconscious. A human being who, spiritually speaking, is unconscious is completely unaware of the thought processes that are continuously happening to them. I'm saying happening. People say, I think, as if they had a choice. Because then you might as well say, I'm beating my heart. No, you don't. You are not doing it. It's the heartbeat is happening to you. In the same way you say, I breathe. Well, breathe, you can influence it a little bit. You can take a deep breath. But again, it's not really true that you are breathing. The breathing is happening to you. You can't even stop it, not for long. You can't just hold your breath and then die. There's something in you that wants to breathe, and it's going to breathe even if you're totally unhappy and you want to stop breathing. You can't stop breathing. There's something in you that wants to carry on breathing. So I breathe is not quite correct either. And certainly I am circulating my blood. I am digesting my food. No, you're not digesting your food. It's happening to you. There's an intelligence embedded in every cell of your body, and that is doing all this. It's looking after that. In the same way that now you say, I think. And again, it's just as false in most cases as to say, I'm beating my heart. Because you have, especially if you're completely unaware of your thought processes, you don't have the thoughts happen to you. They suddenly pop up in your head. And you say, I think. No, you don't. You are at the mercy of your thinking. So once you realize that, isn't that amazing? Thought or thinking happens to me, but I'm not actually doing it, because if I had a choice, I would think more pleasant thoughts. And the fact that you cannot think more pleasant thoughts means you have no choice in the matter. Why don't you have a choice? Because you're completely identified with every thought that arises. And what does identify mean? Identify, the noun is identity, which means there is a sense of self. When you're completely identified with a thought, there's a sense of self in every thought. Every thought is imbued with a sense of self, me, a me sense. So the thought gets hold of you, the stream of this continuous stream of thinking gets hold of you, and you are in the grip of it, and that becomes your personality, your person. That becomes who you think you are. And that complete lack of awareness, which is a different dimension of consciousness, that is, one could say, a dimension of consciousness that transcends the thinking mind. And this is why we are here. This is just the preliminary, by the way. There is a dimension of consciousness in you, either already actualized or still latent and just a potential. There's a dimension of consciousness in you that is non-conditioned, unless the thinking, unlike the thinking mind, which is the conditioned thought processes. So a human being who is totally identified with their continuously arising thought processes, we call that human being unconscious in spiritual terms. This is not the conventional meaning of unconscious, because in conventional terms, unconscious means you're... So when people who are not don't know about this, they think when I say that all these people are unconscious, they, what are you talking about? They're not like they're awake, they're not unconscious. No, unconscious in spiritual terms is complete identification with every thought that arises, plus the emotion that accompanies the thought. So you have the mental, emotional energy field that continuously operates in you, and in many cases, in most cases, it's not pleasant. There is a sense of self that is there, embedded in this, an identity that is in there, and that identity, although it has its happy moments here and there, although it pretends that it is quite good at pretending that it's happy, especially on Facebook, but ultimately that identity is not a happy one. Now we come to another word which used in spiritually is ego. Ego is a sense of self that arises from complete identification with the stream of thinking and the emotions that go with it. That is the egoic self. That's the me. A narrative-based sense of identity. So narrative-based means there's a story of me, and emotions accompany it. The story of me. Everybody has a story. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a story. Of course you have a story. You have your past. You have ways in which you interpret the world. You interpret your own life to some extent. You interpret your life situation. But you realize that these are thoughts. You interpret the past, and again it's a very problematic interpretation, because if you're two siblings, adults, let's say they are 40 years old, and you ask them about events that happened in their childhood, and they have totally different stories about the same event. This is not uncommon. It's a totally different interpretation. So you cannot even be sure that the way in which you remember or interpret your past is correct. What you can be sure about is that it is a narrative. It may be quite correspond to the truth, come very closely or not. It's a narrative. It's a narrative in your head. So we have an entity that pretends to be you, that consists of thought formations and emotions coming together, and this entity is the egoic self. And this entity has certain needs and certain characteristics, and one of the main characteristics of this entity, that is the false self, is a sense of insufficiency, of not enough, and of lack. Something important is missing in my life. There's something important missing. And also accompanied this, another thought is there, that is, there's certain things that I need to solve. I need I mentioned it earlier, I need to solve this problem of me. So many people's identity is, they regard it as I am a problem to be solved. Are you ever going to solve it? No. Not on that level. There is a solution, there is an answer, but that answer is not in that dimension of consciousness that is thinking, unconscious thinking. That is, there's no answer ever to be found. Some therapists are good, that they can perhaps enable you to access that which transcends thinking, the awareness dimension. I sometimes call it the transcendent dimension. Other therapists may just keep you stuck for 10, 15, 20 years on that level of purely mind and emotion. And the more you delve into it, not that it is a bad thing to delve, to see things more clearly, But the more you go into it, into your past, the more differentiated and complicated it becomes. So again, that is not. There's no ultimate solution to the dilemma of your existence, and the egoic self, apart from the characteristic of always experiencing itself as lacking in something, it feels that ultimately it is insubstantial, the me. So you always need something to fill it, to add to your sense of self. You need either, it might be a possession, it might be an achievement. There's nothing wrong with possessions, there's nothing wrong with achievements. It might be a relationship, you need a person. There's nothing wrong with relationship. Everybody has. It's great to want to achieve something, but that operates on a completely different level. It does not operate on the most fundamental level. No achievement, no matter how wonderful it is, and it is great. Why not achieve something great? But if you derive your identity from whatever it is you achieve, you're still trapped on that level of consciousness, and that means always very quickly you go back into suffering. Even after the great achievement, very quickly you are drawn back into suffering. I've spoken to many people who have achieved great things in the eyes of the world, and they tell you, yes, always when they think, I made it. And then one morning they wake up again and their mind creates more suffering. The problematic me arises again in a different form. Challenges are experienced that are different from the challenges you experienced before. You thought, when I have my private jet, I'm not going to have challenges anymore. But you will. I don't have one, fortunately, but I know people who do. And they are deeply challenged. They are deeply challenged by their life situation. Again, very different from before, when they didn't have any money. That was a different challenge. So it is wonderful to achieve, to do things, to be active. That is a level that is to be acknowledged in your life, that level, but it does not solve the fundamental dilemma of human existence. In other words, it does not enable you to realize your true identity, because there is such a thing as your true identity that has nothing to do with the story in your head. It has nothing to do with your past or your so-called future. I say so-called future because the future doesn't exist. You might have noticed. I've never found it. I've never experienced the future. If anybody had, let me know if you ever do. The future only exists as a thought in your head. And of course it exists on a practical level where we need that kind of thing in order to do things on this level of existence. Of course we need future. We could never have met here, come together, because we needed future and say, on this day and at this time, we are going to get together here. We could have said perhaps, let's see if one day we accidentally come together because there's only the present moment, so let's see if the present moment accidentally brings us together. No, on the practical level, it's all fine. You need future, but on a deeper level, to know who you are beyond the narrative in your head, You don't need future, and future is recognized as ultimately illusory. So there is in every human being the potential of realizing the transcendent dimension within yourself. And that is ultimately what spirituality means. It's the realization of the transcendent dimension of consciousness. Until you at least touch that, glimpse that, your life remains a very frustrating business. And ultimately, just you will end bitter and frustrated if you go through your whole life never even having had a glimpse of the transcendent dimension. And hopefully, of course, more than a glimpse is to deeply realize the transcendent dimension. At the moment, there may be one or two of you here for whom the word transcendent dimension is an abstract concept, and your mind might say, what are you talking about? To some people it may just sound like some obscure philosophical concept, transcendent dimension. What does that mean? Okay, I will show you, and we are here for those of you. There are many of you, by the way, who have already accessed the transcendent dimension, but you didn't have a name for it. But we are here to actually experience the transcendent dimension. I'm just gradually taking you there, and most of you know where I'm going. So just be with me. We're gradually approaching it. We've been looking at that which is not the transcendent dimension. So ultimately you could say, you need to know, it's knowing who you are not that is the beginning of the realization of the transcendent dimension. You need to know who you are not. You need to recognize that the narrative in your mind is no more than a narrative. It has a certain validity, but it's not to be trusted, and it has certain characteristics that do not make for a happy life. I already mentioned sense of lack, sense of insufficiency, never enough, and a very deep desire to experience antagonism with others. That's built into the egoic structure. That's why it's so insane. The ego needs enemies because it defines itself through the other. It enhances its ultimately illusory identity, the narrative of me, by creating a sense of superiority, moral or otherwise, towards your enemies. And this is why people love criticizing others, love judging others negatively. This is why people love complaining continuously about other people or situations even. Situation can become your enemy too. There are people who are never happy where they are, they never like where they immediately find something to criticize about people, they immediately find something to criticize about their life. There's continuously complaining voice in the head. The complaining voice is a huge ego thing that continuously feeds. The ego loves complaining because then you emphasize your superiority. Even if you complain about a situation, it implies that you are superior to the situation. You are judging it. You complain about a person, it's usually you are right, and of course that person is wrong. If there's one or two people here who are still completely unconscious, there might be one or two. You might want to look in to see, isn't it strange that you are always right and everybody else is always wrong? Isn't that strange? That's strange. I'm always right. Wow. in every discussion, in every encounter, I'm always right. Oh, I never realized that. Wow, that must be great, I must be wonderful. So to watch, occasionally you might still get this complaining thing in your head. It's not complaining uselessly. It doesn't change anything, that kind of complaining. It's just whining. Some people have the whining. And then there's you complain about your life. The ego needs superiority. The identity, the false identity of the ego needs to be superior to others. Now, one way of being superior to others is to have an achievement that others don't have. Now, if you're lucky, you have a great body, and others' bodies is not as good as yours. So that means for about, I don't know, for 2 decades or 2.5 or 3 decades, that works. And you can derive your sense of who you are from the image of your body, and you compare to others, and of course other bodies are puny if you compare to yours, so you display it and why not? It's something to be grateful for. I mean, I never had a great body, so my ego didn't arise there at all. It had nothing to do. It couldn't use my body to enhance itself. It used other things. So you have body or external appearance, and then fine. If you're good looking, it's a wonderful thing. Be grateful for it, but deriving your identity from it, giving you a sense of superiority towards others, ultimately will also lead to suffering. Ego always leads you eventually to suffering. At the latest, it leads to suffering when one day you look in the mirror and you suddenly realize that something happened to the mirror. The image has changed. It's no longer something happened to it. And what happened to it? It's the same thing that happens to an apple if you put it on a windowsill for 3 weeks. It just took 30 years for you, but it takes 3 weeks for the apple, but the result is the same. So what happens to the apple on the windowsill happens to your body eventually. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy your beautiful body if you have one. While it lasts, it's lovely. It's not who you are. And if you know who you are, then you can enjoy having body without deriving your sense of identity from it. That's great. No, but if you don't have a body, there are many other things you can be superior to others. You can be superior by possessions. You have more than the other. It's a very favorite thing of the ego. You can be superior because your car is better than somebody else's, or you have a car and the other guy has a bicycle. You can be superior in knowledge and derive your sense of identity from you hit other people over the head with your superior knowledge. Didn't you know that? Let me tell you. That's how it is. And that gives a boost to the ego. Or you can derive it from your past, not necessarily your past, your family's past. Especially in Europe, it still happens here and there. In England, or you see where there's still social classes. In India, still very strongly too, identification with your family and ancestors, and there's nothing wrong with that. To honor your ancestors is a wonderful thing, but then you look. Okay, this was my. When I was a student at university, a new student came and he had just arrived from Europe, and somebody asked me, "Can you please show him the buildings and so on?" And he was a graduate student, and I showed, and he had an aristocratic title. I won't repeat what it is. And I said, well, this building, I said, dates back to the year 1520. And this building is actually one of the oldest in the college. It's 1425. And he said, oh, it's almost as old as my ancestral home, which actually seemingly goes back to the year 1200. So that is great for the ego. I mean, I would have been ecstatic when I had a big ego in my 20s if I had had an ancestral home going back to the year 1200. Wow, well, I'm automatically superior to almost everybody. And I don't have to do anything for it. My name is enough. And you still meet people who are trapped in that identity. And it's so habitual, they don't know that they look down on almost everybody. Now, but what does the ego do if you don't have any of these things? You don't have superior knowledge, you don't have a great body, you don't have possessions, you don't have ancestors. Oh, okay, easy, says the ego. I'm a victim. I'm a victim of life, of other people, of groups of people, of some people in my family. I am a victim. This is what they did to me. And let me tell you my story. This is what they did to me. Huge superiority you suddenly have, and you don't have possessions, you don't have ancestors, you don't have superior knowledge, you don't have a great body, and yet you are superior to most people because you are a victim, which means you are morally superior. So you have, and of course there are many people who are victims of other people. There are people to whom bad things happened in childhood, very bad things. So there are people who have experienced being a victim, but the fallacy is to build an identity around it, which becomes a narrative, which is a mental emotional entity that then virtually lives in you, inhabits you, and you become the victim. And this, by the way, as you know, the egoic identity can be predominantly personal. It can also be predominantly a group identity, a collective identity. A collective identity is a tribe, or a nation, or a religion, or a race, or a political thing. This is the collective ego identity. You have personal and you have collective. Now, the collective ego identity is even more insane than the personal. It is, to a large extent, responsible for millions and millions and millions of deaths in the world. A collective identity that pronounces the other group as the enemy. It needs the enemy to define its sense of self more strongly. So the victim identity is, in a small form, begins with every useless complaint that arises in your mind about other people. Because every useless complaint, you're a little bit of a victim. Even if you line up at the airport and the line is not moving and the flight is delayed and your mind starts complaining. Now, if you look very carefully into that, in that moment you derive a sense of superiority by pronouncing a judgment on the airline and the people who run it and the whole setup and everything that is in it, that gives you your sense of identity, enhances it. The otherness of others needs to be more pronounced. That the ego loves that. It's the opposite of love. So to enhance the otherness of others, whether the others are a group or a single person is one of the things that really keep the ego going. So these are things that you may still experience from time to time remnants of this thing in your life, although you are awakening. And if it happens, just be there and be aware of it, so that you don't get trapped into that. What is the way beyond that level of consciousness, or as we call it, unconsciousness? And that has been, despite certain spiritual teachers that have been around here and there, from the Buddha, from Krishna, others who have pointed to the truth, largely most of humanity has been trapped in the egoic consciousness for thousands of years. And it has produced what we now know as human history. If you doubt that the normal state of consciousness of humans has a strong element of insanity, if you doubt that, you really need to read a book about. Don't even go into distant history. There's too much of it. Just read a book about the first half of the 20th century. That wasn't that long ago. Read a book about the first half of the 20th century and what happened in Europe, in Russia, in China. Just read that, and your mouth will drop open if you read it and say, that actually is insane. That cannot be other than insane. So much suffering created not by natural disasters, but by humans, creating so much suffering for other humans, and so many people, millions upon millions, killed, not only in warfare between nations, but killed by their own governments. Germany, Russia, China, in smaller places, Cambodia, just dreadful, unbelievable things. So there is a strong element of insanity in this, what is called the normal human consciousness, because all these atrocities, these millions upon millions of people killed, they were not killed by psychopaths, but the number of people killed by criminals and psychopaths is very, very small compared to the number of humans killed by normal humans. Normal. And this is why I've been saying for years, normal equals insane. It's a slight exaggeration, but there's a lot of truth in it. So it is vital that and this is why we are now again at a situation where you can see the same unconsciousness arising again in the collective, going in the same direction as before. But what is different here is there's a certain segment of the population where in whom a new consciousness is arising. So that could save us, but I cannot guarantee that it will. In the long term, it's all beautiful. I know that the evolution of consciousness will proceed. The only question is, are we going to experience a regressive period for a while? That could be. But no gain in consciousness is ever lost. So what is happening here will become part of the collective human consciousness. And even if humanity has to go through a regression, as they did, for example, after the collapse of antiquity, after the collapse of Greek and Roman civilization, which was relatively advanced, humans had to go with the so-called Dark Ages for several hundred years. Some people say it was 1,000 years, but 1,000 years is very little in the whole of history. So it's not important. What is important is that there is an awakening that is spreading. Still, a lot of it is underground. It is not visible on mainstream television, newscast. You will very unlikely that you will find an account tonight in the Situation Room of CNN about our gathering here. This is a Situation Room. There was a meeting at the Beacon Theatre today. And these people claim that it is possible to lead a peaceful and sane existence. What do you think? And now let's go into the really good news, which is, what is this transcendent dimension? Now, as a concept, it's just that, just a concept. But what is the reality of it? Is it possible to experience, or to know, or perhaps at least to have a glimpse of that transcendent dimension, not at some point in the future, but here and now. Here and now. So, what am I talking about? What is the transcendent dimension? So what we need to do now, obviously, is take our attention to the present moment, because that's the only place where you can find the transcendent dimension of consciousness, because it is timeless. There's no past and future to it. It is only by taking your attention deeply into this moment that you can encounter the transcendent dimension in yourself, and that transcendent dimension in yourself is also who you are beyond the personality, beyond the so-called person. And then you realize that you exist both on the level of humanhood. You are a human, as I call it. You are a human, which is your existence on the level of form, physical form, mental, psychological form of who you are, thought. That is your temporary existence of a person. And you also exist in the transcendent, and that is the being, human being. Human is who you are on the level of form, body and mental form. Now, for most people, that's all they ever know about themselves, that they are trapped in that level. And that is what produces human history, that is what produces what you can watch on TV in the newscasts tonight, politics. That is that dimension of consciousness. Then the being dimension is who you are beyond the stream of thinking, on the level of conscious awareness. Let's stay with just this present moment. What does this moment, if we go deeply into this moment, how do we go deep enough? What does it even mean to go deep into this moment? Well, let's see. If we go deeply into this moment, what does it mean to encounter who you truly are? Because that's what the transcendent dimension is. That already was the question asked by the ancient Greeks. Know thyself, the dictum that probably was first uttered by Pythagoras, one of the first or the first Greek philosopher who lived about the time of the Buddha. Know thyself. Know thyself. That's on the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece. It was carved in the stone. Know thyself. That's the most important dictum in human life. Now, that does not primarily refer to knowing the story of yourself better. That could be interesting, but that's not it. It knows going beyond the story into a dimension of timelessness in yourself, the dimension of depth. So, at this moment, what does this moment consist of? This moment consists, first of all, obviously, here, your sense perceptions, visual and auditory mainly, to some extent tactile, because you feel you're sitting on a chair, and so on. So you're taking in the entirety of this room, or there's a man sitting on a chair. You hear the sounds of my voice. They are, you hear the sounds, auditory perception, and they become thoughts in your head. You're kind of following the sounds, because then they become thoughts in your head. So temporarily if you're listening carefully, you're thinking the same thoughts, but you might also get other thoughts in your head that say, oh no, that's not true. So that may also happen. So this moment, sense perception, this room, thoughts, just, okay, is there anything else to this room? Is there anything else to this moment? There's the perception of the light, people, peripheral perception of the room. Let's see for a moment, let's use an analogy. Let's say if you were this room, this big room, and if I asked you, can you describe yourself to me, and you are this room in our weird analogy, you would say, well, there's me, the ceiling looks like that, the walls look like that, they're beautiful, beautifully made, I'm quite good looking, although I'm a little bit old. And then there's the floor there, and there's these lovely lights, and there's furniture in it that's also part of me, the room. There's the stage and all that, there's a screen, and then you can talk about it in more detail. And okay, now after a while then you said, okay, thanks, so you've just described to me yourself. Is there anything else that you forgot? No, that's it, I think. I can't see anything else. Okay. No, haven't you forgotten something? What is the most important thing about you? What is the most important thing about a room? The most important thing about a room is not the ceiling, the walls, the floor. The most important thing about the room is the space in the room. That's the essence of this room. The essence of this room is the space. And the space, is the space even something? We can't even say that the space is something. We can't define it. It has no form. But it is undoubtedly the essence of this room. Now, in the same way, if you look into yourself, you have thoughts that arise, you have emotions, you have feelings, and you have sense perceptions. So basically, your entire life is a combination of very simple ingredients. Your entire life consists of sense perceptions, thoughts, and feelings, emotions. I think that's it. Now, with every person, though, they are mixed in a different way. Because the sense perception that you experienced as a child and experiencing now are different from other people's sense perceptions, but they're sense perceptions. You hear, you feel, you touch, you take in, that you experience life. And then you experience life on the level of the mind. And many people don't actually experience sense perception very strongly anymore because so much of their attention is absorbed by thinking. They're hardly here. And so many people's attention, especially those people who are completely identified with thinking, they're hardly aware of their surroundings because they're continuously absorbed in thought, the noise of thought. And you can see people like that. You can see that their eyes are kind of lifeless. There's no longer any energy coming through their eyes because everything is being completely gobbled up devoured by mind activity, and the entire consciousness, their attention is. So they might be looking at you, but they don't really see you. They might see a judgment they have about you, but they don't see you. And then they're running about the city. on the phone. Sense perceptions, thoughts, emotions. Okay, that makes those because your entire past is thought. It's so your entire life consists of sense perceptions, thoughts, emotions that go with the thoughts. And that's it, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Sense perception, that's my life. Haven't I forgotten something important? I have a feeling I forgot something very important. And that is so easily overlooked, very easily overlooked. The most important thing is just as easily overlooked as the space in this room that makes up the essence of this room. And that which is overlooked is the one thing that would still apply even if your sense perceptions, all your sense perceptions were totally illusory or a dream. Even if this room were something that you are dreaming up. And philosophers have over the centuries have discussed the possibility that life is a dream. And you cannot refute the possibility. That's a possibility. You cannot deny that you may be dreaming this whole thing. You are dreaming that you are sitting in a chair, on a chair, and you're listening to a man sitting on another chair who says that you may be dreaming right now. Okay, you may be dreaming, but even if you're dreaming, there's still something without which you couldn't be dreaming. There needs to be a consciousness in which the dream appears. Without consciousness, there's no dream. Without the space in this room, there's no room. You are conscious at this moment. Otherwise, you would not be experiencing this, and you would not be able to think anything, see anything, hear anything. All these things require consciousness to appear. But what is consciousness? Consciousness is what remains when one thought comes to an end and the next thought hasn't started yet. For example, I'm now coming to the end of a sentence right now, and for just a few seconds the following sentence will not start. And if you were alert during this gap, I wasn't thinking, and if you were alert during this gap, you were not thinking either. I'm suggesting to you the possibility of being conscious without thinking. For example, now. It doesn't have to be long, just a little space. Just a little space, alert presence. You're still perceiving everything. You're still hearing. But you're not thinking. You're not right now. In order to know yourself on that level, you do not need to remember your history. You do not need to remember your problems. You do not need to remember your victories or failures. You don't need to remember whether you're a man or a woman or something in between. You don't need to remember your email address or your latest Facebook post. in order to know yourself as a presence, you don't need to remember your story. Whether right now your story happens to be happy for a while or unhappy, no longer relevant. You don't need to remember your name to know who you are, because what is your name? It's a sound. It's a thought. Nothing else. So let's see if you can keep your internal space free and just be aware of yourself as a spacious presence. It's easier, by the way, if at the same time you can feel that a certain aliveness pervades your entire body, so that one could almost say that you become present in every cell of the body. There is there's a simple presence. And while that presence is conscious, but it's not thinking. Now, when this is the most, if you can realize that this is possible, at first, of course, there seems to be nothing there really. There's just a kind of blank space. But if you stay with it, if you don't run away from the blank space, because the mind doesn't want you to go there, it says, why are you doing this? Don't you know that you have problems? Don't you know that you need to think about your problems right now? No. You deal with your problems when the time comes. You take action and you pick up a phone and you do something. But in the meantime, you're not going to have your life devoured up by your so-called problems, the beautiful essence of your life, devoured up by your mind, pretending that you need to worry about your problems and you're going to solve them by continuously thinking about your problematic self. You deal with it when the moment comes and there's a possibility of dealing with it, you take action. That's it. But here and now, don't follow the mind when it says, oh, don't go there. I have no time now to be present. I need to get these problems sorted out first. Now, if you say that, I need to get this sorted out first, and my life is just too complicated I can't be bothered with this right now. I have too much on my plate, as the expression goes. I have too much on my plate. Okay, 10 years pass. Are you ready now? No, I still have got a lot on my plate. 20 years pass. Oh, I've never had more on my plate than now. Don't come to me now. And then you're on your deathbed. And still can't stop thinking. The amazing thing is, the next human evolution has not come to an end. I mean, if human evolution had come to an end, that would be a tragedy. Oh my God, is that the best you can do? That would be a terrible tragedy. No, it's a work in progress. Gradually, it's very slow, but it's faster now than it has ever been. I know that because in the past there's been this very slow advances and then regressive periods and another slow advance. The human consciousness is evolving. The entire universe is evolving. We are a manifestation of the evolving universe, which is gradually becoming more conscious and more differentiated and producing more conscious life forms. And so the next step in the evolution of humanity is, the development of thinking has been an incredible advance in the evolutionary development of humans. But every advance that has been incredible, wonderful thing, also had a downside. As it became more and more pronounced, it took over more and more humans. Now the next step is not to stop thinking altogether. That's absurd. to be able to think fruitfully and to be able to think effectively and to be able to actually use the mind in order to manifest things, to create things. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool, but it's only a wonderful tool if it is a tool. It is not a wonderful thing if you are possessed by your mind. It's not a wonderful thing if you identify with your mind and it gives you a sense of self. Then it becomes destructive. It becomes the ego. The next step in the evolution is, as I call it, not to be able to relinquish thinking temporarily for periods of time, brief periods, sometimes longer periods, to be able to step into no thought, but not to fall below thinking. Sometimes people think I'm talking about regressing to the state of an animal, because an animal doesn't think, not conceptually. It's conscious, yes, has consciousness, but the dog has no thoughts about you. The dog doesn't have conceptual thoughts about you and judge you. That's why the dog is joyous most of the time. It's not burdened by thought. The dog does not have a life in the mind. It says, "Oh, my life." It doesn't have a self-image. I don't like the way I look. Now the dog is so joyous because it hasn't arrived at thinking yet. It's still at a pre-thought stage. So it's still more deeply connected with a deeper essence of life within, the essence of life. The tree is even more deeply connected. But it is still, the tree is just, if you were, compared relative to the tree, the dog is insane, and relative to the dog, the human is insane. But we cannot go back to the pre-thinking stage. Many people try that because they are so burdened by their mind that they need to get me out of here. And of course then, yes, you can take certain substances that will take you below thought. And for a little while you are relieved. You say, I'm no longer burdened with my unhappy self. Such a relief. Isn't life great? Give me another drink. Oh, God, I can't even remember my problems anymore. Or whatever it is you take. Now this is a huge, millions need their drugs, whether it's prescription drugs or other drugs. They need their drugs because they need to escape the torture of their mind. But most of these drugs take you below thought and give you some relief, yes. So one way is to go below thought, but the evolutionary, where we are heading in evolutionary terms is we are rising above thought. Let me now demonstrate to you, I've just done it a little bit, so that it's sometimes easier just to see. If you fall below thought, you go, you're a little bit like a fool, which is a mythological figure. The fool is a mythological figure in mythology who often does things that a more developed person cannot do, because the fool is still more connected with the beingness, but hasn't arrived at thinking yet, hasn't developed an ego yet. People like in contemporary culture, it would be people like the Hobbit, or it would be people like Forrest Gump. The fool whose mind is not developed enough, but yet who does wonderful things without even claiming credit, without even doing anything. But we can't go there. We can't go there. We have to rise above thinking, which means it's in a state of relaxed alertness. And right now, if I'm inviting you into that state of relaxed alertness, in which you don't need to remember your name or your past. And you will now, I want you to verify in yourself, without remembering your past or your name right now, are you still what you call you, your most essential identity? Do you feel that's still there even if you don't remember your past? Can you sense a presence there that has nothing to do with your history? There is undoubtedly a presence there. And that presence, if you stay with it and allow it to be there and go more deeply into it, you sense it much more strongly. And then it becomes something almost a very subtle sense of joy in that presence, where you are there just as an aware presence. And that is, once you sense that, that is the liberation, it's the beginning of the liberation from your mind-made sense of self. It's the beginning of the liberation from the person, from the personality, which still exists, but you're no longer in the grip of it. So to access that is who you are in essence. And who you are in essence is no different from who I am in essence and the other person is in essence. That essence is what we share. What we don't share is the personality. If we only interact as personalities, every interaction is going to be conflict-ridden and become problematic very quickly. Every relationship is going to become problematic very quickly if you only interact one person to another, with another, one personality with another. But if you have access to this, I call it sometimes the deep I first person, the pronoun, the deep I, as opposed to the I that you use in conventional language. When you say I, you normally refer to your personality, you normally refer to the historical self. That's the normal usage of the word I. But there is in you a deep I that is not conditioned. And that needs to be sensed, that needs to be realized to transform your life. You can be rooted in the deep I and yet function actually much better than before, function on the level of the personality or the person and deal with the stuff that you have to deal with. And pursue goals, have aims, be active, but not mistaking any achievement or any activity for who you are. Not seeking yourself in things, not seeking yourself in it, not trying to improve your sense of identity because you already have a full sense of identity in that presence. And then you are not dependent on the fluctuating externals in your life, because every situation that you encounter in your life fluctuates. It's good for a while, and then the thing that made you happy, suddenly the very same thing makes you unhappy. Or you achieve for a while, and then suddenly there's a failure. Or you fail, and there's such a deep failure that let's say you end up in prison, and you have a narrative in your mind that says, I fucked it all up. I'm sorry, I must have channeled a prisoner. and that's the narrative in your mind, and that narrative creates so much suffering. And you can't stand the suffering anymore that there is without ever perhaps having listened to any spiritual discourse or read any spiritual book. Suddenly there's a disidentification from the narrative because it makes your life so painful that you can't stand it anymore, and you step out of it, and suddenly you're there as just a presence, and there you sit in your prison cell, and what you called your dreadful life has receded into the background, and what's left is you as consciousness. And I've known one or two people who told me that's what happened to them in prison, potentially, and others have written to me also that I'm still in prison, but I am free. I've had quite a few communications like that. So that can happen even in the most extreme circumstances. It can happen when the doctor has told you you have a few more weeks. No more. And what does that do? It removes time from you. It removes future from you. And what does that mean? Removes future means it removes thoughts of future. Because every thought of future says, oh, I don't have any. And it's terrible suffering. So this can force you into the present moment, that there's suddenly almost a complete dissolving or collapse of the person or the personality, but not in a negative sense. It's a sudden, and what's left is just you as that presence. And then your life is totally fulfilled. You don't need time anymore, which otherwise you do need, because the person always says, oh, I haven't done that yet. I still have a long bucket list. I'm not ready to go. Look, my bucket list, there's still 50 things I haven't seen and done. Okay. So, liberation from the personality, but still be able to use it and function as a personality. And then inviting the space of pure awareness into your life in ordinary situations throughout the day. Which means create little spaces. You get into your car, close the door, don't immediately start the engine, sit there for 30 seconds. Breathing can help too, but don't see it as a doing. You're not doing anything. If you get the idea that you're doing something, you're doing presence, you're doing being, you can't do being. So you can't say, okay, now I'm going to do 30 seconds of presence. That doesn't work. You have to completely go into the now, into the present moment, so that there's nothing left of you except a sense of presence and the sense perceptions, whatever you're perceiving. Or you're sitting on a... Nowadays, there used to be a time when, before they invented all these devices, these handheld devices, whatever they're called, there used to be a time when sometimes people, where they were sitting in, waiting somewhere, in a waiting room, or waiting at the airport, or waiting, going out into nature, there used to be a time when there were no devices to fill up your mind, and people could either be completely bored or they could be, oh, look around. So I suggest that the great vigilance is required, because these devices that everybody uses, they amplify the tendency of the mind to produce clutter continuously. So clutter means useless thoughts. And it I would include many Facebook posts and even many text messages you get may be relatively useless, I think. And they clutter up your mind. They give you the impression that something important is happening. I need to look. And there's no more... Do you ever see people just sitting somewhere? No. The moment they sit somewhere, they have to look at this. Or stand somewhere. Have to engage with this. It's be vigilant so that you don't clutter up your mind with unnecessarily engaging in this interaction continuously. It's actually addictive. It's an addiction. What effect this will have on the development of civilization now that we have the first generation grown up now with these devices, we don't even know. Let's see. But for you, it's important to be aware that they are addictive because it's the addiction of not being able to stop thinking is now reflected and amplified by this device. I've often said, even before, 20 years ago, I already said, probably the greatest addiction, and at that time they didn't have these devices yet to amplify the addiction, the greatest addiction is the addiction to thinking. And I don't mean fruitful thinking, I mean thinking like worrying and useless projections and useless interpretations and misinterpretations of other people's intentions and all kinds of useless stuff that continuously is a noise in your head and you can't stop and you don't want to stop because you're in the grip of it. It's the addiction to overthinking. And why is the addiction to thinking? Because your sense of identity is derived from thinking. If you don't know the depths, the deep I, then you have to stop thinking. Because stop thinking, who am I? And now this tendency, this addiction, cannot stop thinking, is made even worse by the device. Now not only can I not stop thinking, I can't stop interacting with this thing, which makes me think even more. And there are people who really walk around in a kind of trance. Youngsters, many, it's a terrible thing. Hardly aware of their surroundings. And so this is very important to counteract this tendency in your life, so you create spaces in your life of no thought, of pure looking at something. They don't have to be long. Just the more you practice that, the more it will arise in you. Look at a thing, whether it's a natural thing or man-made thing, whether it's a table or flower. Natural things are even more helpful. Look at a thing for a few seconds without interpreting it mentally. Look around this room right now without interpreting what you see, but seeing it. Being aware of what you see, but not naming it in your mind. Is that possible? Yes. It's actually quite very pleasant. And in that moment when you're perceiving without naming, you are not perceiving things as a person. You're not a historical person in that moment. In that moment you are awareness, you are consciousness, timeless consciousness, the consciousness of the universe manifesting in you and as you and perceiving. And now when you perceive in that way, there is a twofold thing. You are aware of what you are perceiving, visually or auditory. Those are the two main organs of perception. You're aware of what you're perceiving. You're not naming it. You're aware of it. And when you're aware of it, you're aware of somehow one could say, you're aware that there's more to it than what you thought there was when you just gave it a name. That's why I've quoted it before, somewhere in a book or not in a book. Krishnamurti said to someone, when you teach a child the name of a bird, the child will never see that bird again. Well, what he means, of course, was the moment you replace the pure perception with a mental concept, you have a huge veil between you and it. And immediately you dismiss what you see, and you dismiss it by having a label for it. You're not really looking and perceiving the bird anymore when you say, oh, that's a such and such. That's a so-and-so, that's a, oh yeah. And this compulsive naming of everything becomes a huge veil between you and the world around you. It's the veil of your conditioned mind. And that's an aspect of the egoic mind. And that's a terrible way to live, to continuously have this veil, and especially destructive in human relationships. Because in human relationships, you need to see the other human being. You need to see beyond the surface of the other, but you can't do it. It's immediately you have a label that you attach to that, a mental label, and you call this person something. I mean, you all know, everybody knows what prejudice is. Prejudice is to have there's just one aspect of having labels, a label for not being able to see the human being because you have attached a label to the human being. And then you relate to this negative label. And then you labels for everything. A running commentary throughout the day in your mind about situations and people, like somebody's commenting in your head. And you believe in everything it says. That's how it is. So, to be able to perceive, so you see an aliveness or in the presence, even in a table. You acknowledge its beingness, its presence. You acknowledge how the light is reflected. Actually, these things come more to life when you don't compulsively label things. You begin to live again in a universe that's alive. But now there's an added level now. It's not only that. It's not only that you perceive things more clearly, more vividly. It's also that in that moment of not naming, you're also aware of the background to your sense perception. And that background is the space, one could say, in which the sense perception arises, or another word one could use, a canvas. Let's imagine that you are a painting, and what you see painted in the painting is your life situation or your life. There's a certain configuration of people and things appearing in this painting. So you become aware of those things. But if this painting became self-aware, this painting would also become aware of the essence, which is the canvas on which it's painted. And if you become aware of the essence that is behind all your perceptions, that's yourself. That's yourself as presence. So you can look around this room, see everything, and at the same time not only be aware of what you are seeing, but also be aware, now this sounds a little weird, but also be aware of your own awareness, to sense your own presence. It's not your own, I just call it your own, to sense the presence that you are, without which there would be no perception. So you can sense your own, not your own, you can sense your presence in the background of your perceptions, which means you're still, your mind is still. If you haven't read my little book, Stillness Speaks, read it. It's good for meditative reading, for taking you into that space of still presence. Still, alert presence. And you can sense the presence in the background as if it were the canvas on which your sense perceptions are painted. And that is a wonderful way of being in the world. It changes the interaction with every human being, whether it's a very brief relationship or a close relationship, to perceive the other. And when you look at another human being, you feel your own presence. And then you can look, yes, you're aware of the personality of the other person, but you can sense that beyond the personality, there is a presence, there is a beingness. But you can only sense that because it reflects yours. In fact, it's one with yours. And so to realize the other, in essence, is the same consciousness as you, and it's not your consciousness, and it's not the other person's consciousness. It's universal consciousness expressing itself as a temporary human being. And then that is the true meaning of loving as it goes in the Gospels, love your neighbor as yourself. Your neighbor is the person next to you, as it's in some languages is translated as the one next to you. Loving your neighbor as yourself, it doesn't mean as yourself doesn't mean you love this person as much as you love yourself. It means to recognize yourself in the other. And that recognition that in essence you share this consciousness. This is the one consciousness that all humans are temporary expressions of, and other life forms are also temporary expressions of. The one underlying consciousness that uses the brain. Science haven't discovered this yet. There's still a belief in mainstream science that that consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, of the physical brain. But most scientists don't even talk about consciousness because they don't know what to do with it. So consciousness is the brain, I would suggest, is a focalization of consciousness. And it receives consciousness and focalizes consciousness in a particular way through human beings that creates a particular world in this dimension. But it receives consciousness in the same way that a radio or a television receives the signals and forms an image. Consciousness then is the essence of all life, and to know yourself as consciousness is also knowing the other as consciousness. And that transforms human relationships. Then you acknowledge the personality of the other, but you don't confuse the personality of the other with who they are. And then you can operate still as a personality, but there is a recognition, a silent recognition of the other. And that silent recognition of the other, that's actually the true spiritual, esoteric, true meaning of love. Of the true meaning of love, or we could say all empathy is there, an outflow of benevolence, an outflow of loving kindness. You may remember the Dalai Lama said, he didn't say, my religion is Buddhism. He said, my religion is kindness. That's a wonderful statement, because there's much more to kindness. It's not a superficial thing. Kindness is an outflow of well-being, of benevolence towards other life forms, towards other human beings. It's the ability to have empathy, and that all does not come from the personality. The personality might say, I'm a good Christian, I'm a good Buddhist, or I should be accepting and I should be loving this person. It's hard, but I'll try. That is what transforms human human relations. And if it transforms a relationship between two human beings, it will also transform relations between groups of humans. You don't need to deny your form identity, whether it's the physical body, whether it's the psychological form of you, or whether it's even a certain group identity. You can still feel, yes, I belong to this particular group. You don't even have to give up your political persuasion. You don't have to, but you have to be able to look if you are belong to one particular party in your mind. But the important thing is yes, you can have a position, a mental position, of course, everybody has. I have certain political opinions. I'm not going to talk about them because there are more important things to talk about. But not to be identified with mental positions. Then you can voice your mental position, and this is how I see it. But you don't make the other into your dreadful enemy, because you can see although the other may have different mental positions, there's still the beingness there. Because if you make the other into an enemy, you might actually create the monster that you see. So the freedom is the freedom from compulsive thinking, the freedom from identifying totally with the thinking mind. Meditation can be a helpful tool for many people. Meditation is a great thing if you don't regard it as you need to achieve something through the meditation, because then it becomes a doing again. The way why meditation ultimately does not, many people practice it, but they don't really experience a transformation in their normal daily life, is that it's a doing. They're doing a meditation, and they're trying to achieve a particular stage through the meditation, so that already you're projecting a future self. Whereas meditation ultimately is the realization of being. So it cannot be a doing. It's a realization of being. And meditation can be at any moment when you become alert and you stop naming. In that moment you have risen above thought. And it's so beautiful to be free of yourself. And then, of course, you can still operate as a self without completely being trapped in it. You're not trapped in it anymore. There's a space in you, and there's a growing space in you, and there's more space in you. And then the personality becomes a little bit transparent to the light of consciousness. So even while you are speaking and thinking, there's still your thinking and your speaking is more spacious. There's an awareness that flows into your words too. And then the words become different. They're no longer just a repetition of stuff that you accumulated. There can be inspired speaking, because the presence begins to use your mind. And there can be inspired action, because the unconditioned presence uses your mind to do things. And it's beautiful. So the key is to embrace that beautiful state of alert attention, which is aware presence, as much as possible. Perform little actions, just being present, not as a means to an end. When you walk in your room, from your desk to the door, you take the steps, and you're conscious at every step. Why do you think you need to get to the door? You'll get there soon enough. In the meantime, this step is more important. Your life isn't going to be better when you get to the door. And this is just one example. There's always, I need to get there. Of course you need to get there, but in the meantime, you're here. The step you're taking at this moment is the most important step in your life, because there is only this moment ever. And if you're completely absorbed by where you need to get to, all that it means is you're completely absorbed by your thinking mind. And you will find that pursuing goals that arise not out of the egoic need to be more of something, to be more superior to somebody, but a true goal, something that brings some change into the world, then you will find your actions and your words become actually empowered. And your thoughts, you will have creative thoughts, that new, fresh thoughts that you didn't have before. And these are very different thoughts from the old, repetitive thoughts that go through your head all the time. Oh, so you have an insight. This is where intuition arises, or any truly creative action arises. It comes, you have to go beyond the mind in order, so that something that is deeper than the mind can use the mind. Use your mind. But primarily we do it because we become free of, as the Buddha put it, you become free of suffering. The psychological suffering that makes people, millions of people's lives dreadful. Psychological suffering, the freedom from suffering is when you know who you are in your essence. Then challenges remain, but they're not transformed into unhappiness, because it's the unhappy me that creates suffering. And then every challenge, you can actually say, oh, here comes another, okay. And you see, look at it. And you'll see that every challenge actually then intensifies your presence. Oh. And then even death, approaching death, and all approaching death then does, and it'll come to you and to me, to all of us. It's approaching already, of course it is. What is the saying? Life is a sexually transmitted disease with a fatal outcome, fatal prognosis. Everybody, it's so. If now, of course, death may come to you suddenly, so you might not have time, or it may come gradually, and then you go totally present. Totally, just there's no historical person anymore. It's already dissolved before the body dissolves. The historical person is already burnt up in the fire of presence. Death can do that to you, approaching death. The historical person, the personality, the person, the conditioned person, burnt up in the fire of presence. And there you are. Realize the timeless being that you are. And that's the realization. It's not a person realizing that, it's a universe realizing it through you. So that is, we have addressed the whole purpose of human existence is to bring, you're the bringer of consciousness into this world. And that's why you're here. Whatever you have done or failed to do as the historical person is fairly unimportant as regards the arising of the new consciousness. Whether you have failed in most things or have succeeded in many things, or it might be a mixed bag, doesn't matter anymore. It has brought you to this point, the point of awakening, so it all made sense. And therefore, retrospectively, every mistake that you ever made was actually a good thing. because it's brought you to this point of the awakening of consciousness. And every suffering that you created for yourself and even for others in your unconsciousness, there's no person, it's human unconsciousness that creates the suffering. Every suffering created, and yet you create it for yourself. All the mistakes, I made so many mistakes, just one after another. Why did I do that and that? And then why did I marry that person? I shouldn't have done that. That was a huge mistake. What can I do now? Okay, all that evaporates, and suddenly all the mistakes have brought you to here, which means they're not mistakes at all. Thank you for all my mistakes. Well, I thank the universe for all the mistakes I made and for the suffering. So the suffering, of course, is if the suffering is necessary. This is my paradoxical statement. The suffering is necessary until you realize that it is unnecessary. Until you realize that it is unnecessary, the suffering is actually a helpful thing, because it brought you into, eventually, it forces you into awakening. Hopefully in this lifetime, it forces you into awakening. And therefore the suffering is a twofold thing. It's both a wonderful thing and something that you transcend. And of course that's expressed, and you can understand, you don't need to be a Christian to understand this. It's expressed in the symbol of the cross, because the symbol of the cross is a torture instrument, obviously, and the cross is a symbol for the divine. Twofold. So the cross symbolizes suffering, and the cross symbolizes the end of suffering and the transcendent dimension, which is exactly what the Buddha talked about. Because the Buddha said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. So with that I will leave you. Thank you.